All right, let's talk reality TV.
Honey Boo Boo Child.
No, not that kind of reality. I'm talking real reality, the kind created by Ken Burns. He, along with Michael Moore, the most influential non-fiction filmmaker of our time, and it's because of series like this.
Baseball is a beautiful thing.
Baseball, jazz.
Jazz music celebrates life, human life.
The Civil War.
They knew they were making history, and it was the greatest adventure of their lives.
Sweeping, epic-length documentaries that brought pivotal eras in history to life. Ken has had such an impact that they even named a shooting style after him. What you're seeing here is called the Ken Burns effect. His latest film is called The Central Park Five, about 5 teens wrongfully convicted in the brutal rape and beating of a woman jogger. The 5 are suing the city of New York for damages, and the city subpoenaed Ken's raw footage. It's Ken's first truly modern subject. It's also history that's still in the making.
A lot of people didn't do their jobs. Reporters, police, prosecutors.
Everybody, please welcome to the show, Ken Burns. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you.
A real pleasure.
My pleasure.
Man, there's so many things to talk about. I've spent so many hours watching your stuff. Your stuff's kept me out of trouble because I stay home.
And did go out on the streets,
right,
yeah.
and do what I would run wild as I would. A good documentary can obviously tell a story, and you become known for this historical stuff. This is history, but not really, this particular story.
We've done a film called The Central Park Jogger, and it is about a crime that took place on April 19th, 1989, and that's right at the cusp of where I'd say history sort of begins and journalism leaves off. Good documentaries are about the outrage we feel in the moment about something taking place. But what I've chosen to do for the last 35 years is something that has a little bit more nuance, perhaps, and maybe more perspectives, is less overtly political. It doesn't hit you over the head and tell you which way to vote or believe. But at the same time, when you come across something that speaks to all the themes that have animated what I've been interested in American history, race, the meaning of freedom, and you see the kind of outrage that boils up in you as you come to know the contours of this story, then it's unavoidable. And if your daughter's writing a book about it and you're reading those first few pages of the first draft and think, my God, this isn't just a book, this could be a film, and you end up getting to make a film with my daughter and my son-in-law as co-directors of it, it doesn't get any better than that, except that the story is so tragic and so important. You know, it's so funny. We as a country, we as a world, as a population have struggled with this question of racism, you know, and what it is. And it's the horrible metastasized flip side of an understandable thing, the love of one's own. But when that love metastasizes, then it's always the suspicion of the other. And usually it's skin color that makes the determination. Sometimes it's sexual orientation. Sometimes it's what country you're from, what sex you are.
Socioeconomic status.
Exactly. So these kids go into the system, they go into jail for upwards of 13 years, only to have, when the last one gets out of jail, the actual rapist confess. And then 13 years later, you have this new tsunami of information. But institutionally, the cops, many of the ADAs, the assistant district attorneys, and the media who had been responsible for the fury of this sort of lynching wouldn't take responsibility. So instead of being the #1 story for days, it was buried. And 10 years later, almost 10 years later from their exoneration, the city is no closer to resolving a civil suit that the Central Park Five brought, and more dug in and resistant to the facts.
Does the documentary have to affect change for it to be valuable?
I don't know how you would define change. You know, there are a lot of films that are very politically active that I'm not sure don't do anything except inspirit the congregation. Maybe that's okay. I'm not sure, you know, Michael Moore is a great filmmaker, but I'm not sure people look at Columbine and say, I'm a card-carrying member of the NRA, rip, rip, you know, I'm melting my guns down to beat them into plowshares. But it is important for people who believe with him. I remember after Fahrenheit 9/11, my second daughter said, I'm just glad he's on our side. You know, so I'm not sure whether people do that, but I also know in our films, after the Civil War series was aired, the attendance at battlefields went up. Is it a measure of change that you can get people off their couches and out to a battlefield, or that after the national parks they would do that? One hopes with something like this, it's more galvanic. And it has to be a partnership. It just can't be viewers. It has to be media. It has to be some of the people who were complicit in the original, you know, lynching, right, to get involved and try to say, you know, maybe there is some measure of justice. Maybe there is a way to put an end to this.
Manipulation is always talked about as if it's a bad thing. Is manipulation a bad thing in film?
No, it isn't. It isn't. You manipulate the growth and development of your children. You manipulate your garden. You manipulate almost everything that you do.
I leave my garden in nature.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's all, it is. It just becomes in the service of what and to what degree.
Do you remember the first time you saw a film that was a documentary and you thought, that's the inspiration? That's the one that got me wanting to tell?
You know, it's funny. The laws of storytelling, let me not say documentary, the laws of storytelling apply to me in the same way they apply to Steven Spielberg. They're Aristotelian poetics, if you want to be dragged back, kicking and screaming, and characters, their development, and whatever. This is what you have to do. So actually, my mom died when I was 11 years old, and there hadn't been a moment leading up to that when she hadn't been dying. So
she'd been sick your whole life.
She'd been sick my whole life. And when she died, my dad, who had a very strict curfew for my younger brother and me, would forgive it and let me stay up really late on a school night till 2 a.m. to watch an old Hollywood film, or he'd take me out to see, you know, a new wave film from the French cinema. And I saw my dad cry for the first time. And I suddenly, at 12 years old, understood instantly the power of this medium. What I remember is that my dad cried. And he hadn't cried when my mom died. He hadn't cried at the funeral. And I realized instantly there was no recrimination. It was just an understanding of the power of stories to unlock emotion. And if you think about what I've done since that moment, that decision in 1966, after she died in 65, is I wake the dead.
There's always that running joke that to get the kids to pay attention to history is difficult. Things have changed. Kids' relationship with media has changed so drastically. Will that change the way films can be presented? And I don't mean stylistically. I just mean the concept.
I think so. That's a really wonderful question. People say, you know, back in 1990, it's MTV generation. Nobody's going to watch something that's 11 and a half hours on the Civil War. And they did. And now you get the same thing now. Nobody's going to watch National Parks or The War or the upcoming one. We have a big series that's going to be out in a year or so on the history of Theodore Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. And we've got this mammoth thing on Vietnam that we're shooting right now. And beyond that, we're researching one on country music. I mean, these are things that are going to demand 12 or 14 hours of your attention. Right. But everybody does it. I mean, we got 40 million people in 1990 for the Civil War the first time it was aired, the first broadcast, when there were like 6 channels. And, you know, when the war came out about the Second World War in 2007, we got 37 million when there were 500 channels. So that just means that we are still starved for uninterrupted, non-commercial stuff on this medium that still can thrill us with game shows and reality TVs where people eat bugs and propose in front of hundreds of millions of people, and all the other vagaries that we look at.
Please come back and talk about all those projects.
Thank you, Bruce.
Central Park 5 is the film. You've got to check it out. Ken Burns, everybody. We'll be right back. Thank you.